All righty. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Shreve Community Church for everybody here and everybody who's going to be joining us online as well. I hope you're here for the town hall. We're going to be talking about embryo adoption and the broader fertility industry, and taking a little look behind the curtains as to how all of this functions, and also how my wife and I tie into that. As I announced in church, my wife and I are going to be adopting an embryo next week on Tuesday. We will be heading down to Knoxville, Tennessee to work with Rejoice Fertility. They have some embryos that are frozen right now that'll be thawed out and then inserted into Holly's uterus to hopefully give them a chance at life. And so I want to talk a little bit about that process and why we kind of chose to go into this when we have 4 biological children of our own. And also to talk about the broader industry and to give some of my thoughts on what I hope to see within our nation and the broader world in the coming years as part of some of the work that Holly and I do. But in order to do that, we need to do a little bit of history. So I want to rewind the clock a little bit, all the way back to the 1800s. The 1800s and the early 1900s saw some of the biggest changes that humans have ever experienced. It's a little bit hard to understate the amount of societal and technological changes that happened between the mid-1800s and the mid-1900s. For more than 2,000 years, the best internet around was a dude on a horse. And we went from that to telegraphs and radios within a lifetime. And so the 1800s had a lot of changes that went on. One of the biggest changes was a philosophical change that happened as a result of a guy named Karl Marx. He published in 1848 the Communist Manifesto, and that created a firestorm politically in a number of nations as people really latched on to this new idea of Marxism as the next development in human evolution, in societal evolution. Marxism, just to give you kind of a Cliff Notes version, is a political philosophy and economic philosophy that says the real way to usher in the utopia, to meet people's needs and to really take care of people, requires that everything be owned by the common man, that we need to overthrow governments that are supporting oligarchs or people who have excess wealth, people who own capital. We need to spread that out, and once we do that, people's needs will be met. People will no longer be hungry. They will no longer be forced to work in places where they don't want to work or places that exploit them. They'll actually be able to use their work for their own good, and as a result of that, everything will be wonderful. We will literally usher in a utopia age where we won't have need for wars, we won't have need for country borders or anything, because everyone will be at peace, because everyone's needs will be met. And so that came out in like I said, in 1848, and that sparked a number of major revolutions during the early 20th century. So in 1917, we had the October Revolution, which instituted the USSR after a couple of years of warfare. And in 1927, we had the Chinese Communist Revolution that entered in the CCP, which is still around today. And so all of these had their beginnings in the mid-19th century, mid-1800s. There was also another big revolution that was going on within the scientific community, and that was a revolution in our understanding of genetics, of chromosomes, and how all of that works together in reproduction. So in 1965, a man named Gregor Mendel published an article where he talked about the law of inheritance, where working with, I believe it was sweet peas, he showed that you can actually change the offspring of plants by the way in which you manipulated how fertility happened within the plants, of working with fertility within the plants. That sparked a scientific revolution that led to, in 1909, the term gene first being coined. It was this understanding that we could actually shape and change the genetics and the foundational material of living things by controlling the ways in which those living things reproduced. So you can understand why that would be a huge thing, not only in plant life and farming and all of those things, but how that could even be applied to human beings, first with animals and then with human beings. And so that gave rise to a scientific philosophical idea called eugenics. It literally means good birth. And it was the idea that if we had enough knowledge and enough foresight, we could actually control the way that even human beings reproduce. And as a result of that, we could, in theory, get rid of the manifestations of, we might say, the failures of human genetics that leads to things like blindness or deafness or mental handicaps or, well, anything really. Anything that would detract from human life and what we might think of as the best expression of humanity, we could actually get rid of those things through scientific progress. And so it was in the midst of both of these major political and scientific revolutions that a woman named Margaret Sanger came into the mix. Margaret Sanger was born in the late 1800s, and she began her work. She was the daughter of a devout Catholic Irish woman who had many, many children. She grew up in pretty extreme poverty, and she had the idea of combining these two revolutions into one thing. So she was a Marxist. She believed in the Marxist utopia, that if we could just have the right kinds of revolution, if we could have the power in the hands of the people, if we could get rid of private ownership of capital, we could usher in the utopia. She believed all of that, but she actually went one step further. As a woman who understood the burdens that childbearing had on women, she said just the idea of Marx wasn't enough. Even if we were able to take care of the economic problems and needs of people, that would still not lead to utopia. Why? Well, because women still unfairly bear the burden of bearing children. Now, remember, this is in a time before penicillin. This is in a time before real hospital care, where both maternal and infant mortalities were very, very high. And so she believed that it was necessary for us to actually have birth control as an aspect of a Marxist revolution. Only then could we actually usher into the utopia that Marxism promised. And she had a wonderful, wonderful thing that she said about Marxism. Is she said that it is a entirely male philosophy, and as such can at best only be half right. And so she thought that her particularly unique feminine perspective could be added into this to actually bring about the utopia that people experienced. And so in 1914, she was actually expelled from the United States because of her pushing for birth control within the United States. At this point, it was illegal in the United States to not only offer birth control, but even to espouse it within society. And so she fled to England and to Europe in 1914 because of the things that she was pushing. And she studied Marxism and a lot of the Marxist and communist revolutions that were brewing in Europe at the time. And this is where she kind of developed her idea. And so she came back and she began to espouse the importance of birth control and fighting for political change when it came to birth control. Now, when I say birth control, that's a very loaded term. And so she actually defines it as anything that has to do with having control over how children are conceived or how they are born. So she would include contraception in birth control. She would also include abortion in birth control. And as it turns out, her ideas were extended even to infants. Now, her philosophy in some ways was born out of I believe, a true concern for women. She went around at least the eastern United States, and she interviewed women and tried to build a database for why this might be important. And so she writes talking about the importance of birth control as a means of rescuing women from just awful situations. So she talks about interviewing a woman in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, my neck of the woods where I'm originally from, who had 17 births, 2 of them stillborn, and only 2 of them surviving past infancy. And she talks about how this came about, how this mother didn't know what she was doing, essentially. And so, in interviewing her, this woman admitted that, yeah, she fed her children real food from the age of 1 month. Bread and corn and potatoes and anything that they had on hand. And, well, unsurprisingly, many of her children died. And the way that this woman described it was because, well, the food was disagreeable to them. Now, anybody who's had children would say, yes, obviously. Another woman fed her many sons goat milk from the same milk. Even after that goat got terribly sick and the milk turned sour, she kept feeding it, and all of her children died. And so there was a distinct lack of knowledge when it came to not only having children, but birthing children. There was a lack of resources, as well as a lack of technology that we kind of take for granted today that she was very concerned about. And so that was one of the impetuses for her pushing for what she eventually founded, which was Planned Parenthood, as a means of not only advocating for birth control, for a scientific understanding of its importance, but also incorporating it into what she hoped would be a Marxist revolution within the United States. Now, on the one hand, her ideas are something that's at least at surface level, we can appreciate, right? Because who of us wants women living in poverty? Who of us want women who don't know how to take care of their children to be forced to have those children? Who of us, when we think about our own children, wouldn't want the healthiest, best children that we could have, right? None of us are sitting around saying, boy, I hope my child or my grandchildren have deformities or are blind or have mental handicaps. Like, of course, we don't want that. We want good things for our kids. And so, at one level, that could be understood in her philosophy and what she was trying to do. But on the other hand, there are very, very, very deep holes that her philosophy can lead to. And that was drawn out particularly in the 1930s by the Nazi regime in Germany. The Nazis actually quoted her and used a lot of her work and her writings as evidence and as authoritative use in some of the work that they did. Some of the things that we don't often think about the Nazis is before they began concentration camps and before they started exterminating Jews, they actually began with their own people. In 1933, the Nazis passed the law for the preservation of offspring with hereditary diseases. And this was a law that allowed hospitals to euthanize. Literally, a good death is what euthanize means. To euthanize children who had deformities. This legislation affected individuals who were suffering from any of the following 9 medical conditions. Feeble-mindedness, and so if you were stunted in your IQ or your ability to learn, schizophrenia, manic depression disorder, genetic epilepsy, dementia, genetic blindness, genetic deafness, or severe physical deformity or chronic alcoholism. And so this law allowed for the execution of anybody who fell into these categories. And so what would happen in Germany is children would be tested, infants would be tested, and if they were tested positive for these genetic abnormalities, or if they had particular ways of doing external testing just by observation, if you were thought to have been a carrier of any of these things, well, you were killed by nurses. and that death was chalked up to something that was natural, like tuberculosis or anything like that. But it was kept very hush-hush. Parents weren't told that their children were executed. They were just told, "We're sorry, but your child died in the maternity ward." Now, this was also happening with adults as well, particularly with those who were deemed too low IQ or too mentally handicapped to be a benefit to society, or people who had genetic disorders like blindness or deafness. People were being brought into wards under the pretext of giving them help, and they were killed. The Germans killed tens of thousands of people, of their own people, as an expression of saying, we can actually get rid of these bad genetic markers that we don't want within our society. We can cleanse the human race of these things that nobody wants, and because of our control over that, by taking these people out of the population, by taking them out of the gene pool, we will only have what they might call good stock of people, where we could get rid of all of these things once and for all within a generation of just removing them out of the gene pool. And so not only was euthanizing happening, but the courts were also approving sterilization of nearly 400,000 Germans between 1934 and 1945. And possibly as many as 2,000 people, primarily women, were thought to have died as a result of those procedures. And so again, something that started out that you might be able to talk about as a noble ambition of wanting human beings to have good and full lives without illnesses or sicknesses was taken in the wrong hands to a very, very bad result. So that was just dealing with deformities and dealing with genetics on that end. But there was also the question of, well, who gets to say what counts as an unappealing or undesirable human trait? And this is where it gets perhaps even darker, and where the Nazis go from killing their own people to killing whole groups of people. Because there was also a movement to say that particular races were unsatisfactory, let us say, for the propagation of the human race. And this is where Margaret Sanger found herself as well. So, for example, this is a quote from a letter that she wrote in some of the work that she was trying to do on the eugenics side of her birth control movement within the United States. She writes, "We should hire 3 or 4 colored ministers, preferably with social service backgrounds and with engaging personalities. The most successful approach to the Negro is through religious appeal. We do not want the word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population. And the minister is the man who can straighten out that idea if it ever occurs to any of their more rebellious members." So Margaret Sanger believed that black people were, well, not of the best stock for the propagation of the human race. And so she had it as part of her broader eugenics ideas to say, we actually need to weed out blacks from the genetic gene pool so that we can have better human beings. And the best way that she thought that she could do that, even though she was not religious herself, was through ministers, was through pastors who would be trusted by the people of their congregation, trusted within their communities, and therefore could be useful propagandists for the work that they were doing. She goes on to say, again, these are quotes from Margaret Sanger, "Eugenic sterilization is an urgent need." She was very strong on the need of particularly people who were, quote, feeble-minded, who had low IQs, or who had mental handicaps, to forcibly sterilize them, because she didn't want them having children and thereby passing on their genetic traits to others. So eugenic sterilization is an urgent need. We must prevent the multiplication of this bad stock. And then finally, this extended even beyond birth control as conception and sterilization to even execution of infants. The most merciful thing, she says, that a family does to one of its infant members is to kill it. So this was the beginning of Planned Parenthood, and it was really the beginning of the fertility industry. Birth control, for the first time, was a means that women could have real control outside of prayer and timing cycles for when you have sex, to actually control when women got pregnant. And that continued to develop as technology developed. People had more and more access to different kinds of contraception, as well as different means of killing children that were already conceived, what we call abortion. And so that continued to develop all the way to our present age. Now, obviously, there is a lot that we could say about human life, and Holly and I actually do trainings to talk through the arguments for why, from both a religious and even from a rational perspective, the unborn are human beings that ought to have at least the equal right to life that you and I do, that my little toddler, who I don't know where he is now, running around, has, that the unborn deserve those kinds of rights. But it extends even beyond that, and that's kind of where Holly and I come in, is we are engaging in the fertility industry and a byproduct of the fertility industry, and hopefully making some good out of that. So the embryo that we're going to be adopting, and I will come back to Margaret Sanger and why she's important to our story. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to be adopting a child that was was created through in vitro fertilization. Now, in vitro fertilization, it literally means in the glass, is in vitro. These are embryos that were created by taking the male and female gametes, sperm and egg cells, and combining them in a petri dish. And then usually what they are done with is they're inserted into a woman who generally is having trouble conceiving on her own. And so it's a way of getting around infertility, of highly controlling the process so that the embryo is created, so that the woman is put in the perfect position that she is ready to receive that embryo, and then doing it ourselves. And so it is a very powerful technology that has allowed people who wanted to have children but were unable to have children of their own. And that's generally the push for why in vitro fertilization is so important in our culture, is because, well, it represents a good thing. Children are a good thing. Women having children is a good thing. Families being able to be started and to continue are good things that not only should our culture desire and promote, but it's something that the church and the scriptures encourage as well. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of arrows, talking about blessed are people who have big families, who have lots of children. These are good things. But the way in which we get good things is just as important as the good things themselves. And so there are a number of trade-offs that come with in vitro fertilizations. The first trade-off is the cost. So the cost per IVF cycle, that is per implantation attempt, is between $12,000 and $25,000 in the United States. Because it's expensive. It is to not only collect the sperm and egg cells, to create them, but also to prep a woman's body. There's a lot that goes into that, both in the help of the embryologist as well as just medication to make all of that happen. And so it's expensive to do even one cycle. And the other downside is that it doesn't have the highest success rate. The average success rate ranges from 30 to 35%, with upwards being around 50%. Now, you see why this might be a problem. If it's very expensive to do a cycle that costs $12,000 to $25,000, and you have a 65% chance of it failing, Those are not good odds, right? How many of you would bet 25 grand on a 35% chance of winning? The payout would have to be very high in order to take that, right? Abraham, chill. And so this creates incentives within within IVF. Because you want to create the absolute best chance of getting pregnant, because it's expensive and because there's already a low chance. And if there's anything that goes wrong in the process, you're lowering already pretty low odds, right? And so embryologists and fertility specialists are incentivized to create only the best, healthiest embryos and choose only the best and the healthiest from among the embryos that they create for implantation, right? Because, again, you want to create the best chance for success. And so, unfortunately, the standard practice for IVF is to harvest 8 to 14 eggs, to fertilize all of them, and then to choose from those 8 to 14 embryos, the healthiest ones, and to have those for implantation. Now, all morals aside at this point, we'll get back to that. That leaves the unfortunate question of, well, what do you do if you have leftovers? Because each one represents a possible full-term pregnancy. And so most women are not going to implant more than 3 healthy embryos. Why? Because, well, most women don't want triplets, right? And so of that batch, you're already limiting the size of the batch that you're going to insert. And so that leaves a lot of leftover embryos. Now, a lot of women will freeze those for later use. And so some women will freeze them in case the first round doesn't result in a live birth. They might thaw out some more and then retry the cycle, again, at a pretty high cost to the woman and to the family. Some women might freeze them for later on. And so they might get pregnant and have a child that makes it to full term. And then later on, when this woman is ready for another child, they'll thaw out the embryos that they have saved, replant them, reinsert them, replant them, and again, hope for another child for assembling for that child. And so some women will save them for later. Some get just thrown out. The reality is to keep them frozen, and again, you have to keep them frozen in time and in space, otherwise they'll die. Embryos need to have a home. They need to have a mother to give them nutrition, to give them a safe environment to grow, and if they don't have that, they'll die. And so they are time-bound within like a couple of days that you have to decide what you're going to do with them. And so some are simply thrown out because it costs money to keep them in cryo storage. And so unfortunately, they're just discarded. Some are used for research. They're thawed out and used for things like stem cell research to actually harvest the cells from within these embryos for being inserted into other human beings for medical purposes. Some are thought out for research purposes of doing gene therapy and other things like that on the embryos to see what happens before they do it in, say, adult or children human beings. And then some are donated to organizations like the ones we are working with. We're working with a group called Rejoice Fertility out of Knoxville, Tennessee. And there are a number of different organizations like the National Embryo Donation, Snowflake Babies, that will essentially have custody over these embryos and then will work to match people who want to adopt those embryos, to thaw them out and insert them just like in IVF to give them a chance at life. Now, this is an incredible technology, and these are incredible groups because, one, they are giving opportunities for these embryos to have a shot at life. Again, they are children who have been created and frozen in time to give them at least a chance. It's also a very wonderful opportunity for women to have children of their own, to get pregnant without the costs associated with IVF. And so Holly and I, as we've been going through this process, I think grand total with everything involved, including a home study that was part of our adoption, I think we're going to spend a little bit less than $10,000. I actually think it's a little bit closer to $8,000 for this, which is a big difference when you're comparing it to $25,000. And so it gives women the chance to get pregnant with children, even though they might not be biologically related to them, will still be very related to them because they're going to bear them in their own body and birth them like you would a normal birth. And that's where most women come into Rejoice and other organizations like this. There are people who struggle with fertility issues but want to have children, and this is a way of both meeting a need and also being more financially savvy in having children this way. My wife and I do not have trouble having children of our own, but we have seen this as an important ministry opportunity. One, God's blessed us with a wonderful church and a wonderful church family and a wonderful home and a wonderful job that we think that we can support 5 kids. And so we've decided that even though we don't need help, we want to be a part of giving a chance at life for these kids. There are over 1 million embryos that are frozen right now just in the United States that will continue to be frozen unless they're given a chance at life. And so that's what we are doing. Holly is doing a hormone therapy right now to work with her natural cycle to prepare her uterus so that the lining is ready to receive that embryo. And we will go down next Tuesday to Knoxville. They will thaw out some of the embryos that we have chosen, and then they will insert them into her uterus. And it's actually kind of humorous for me as someone who's kind of watching this. It's very futuristic, right? We're talking about human beings created in dishes, frozen in time, some of them frozen for a very long time. In fact, the doctor that we're working with has the world record for the time that an embryo was created and then frozen and then made it to birth. And that was 28 years? 31. Oh, yeah, that's right. He set a new record. He broke his own record. And so an embryo that was created 31 years ago was frozen for that time, thawed out, and then was able to make it to full term and to a live birth. And so we're actually entering into an age where there will be parents who birth children that are older than them. And so very science fiction kind of world, but it's really funny that once they're thawed out, do you know how they do it? They have like a little Petri squirter, just like a tiny little turkey baster that they use, and that's what they use. So all of this wonderful technology, and we're using a little pipette to do the final step of the process. But that's what we're doing. And we think it's not only really important to both live out our pro-life convictions to say, no, all of these embryos are children that deserve a chance at life. But it's also a way of us saying, like, children are wonderful. People should have lots of kids because they are a blessing, and we want to model that. And so that's one of the reasons why those are the main reasons why we're going into this. Now, I haven't forgotten about Margaret Sanger because I want to talk about how I think that everything that I just talked about with IVF, not with the embryo adoption, but with IVF, is very destructive to the human soul. And this is why I think this. As we were going through our process, all of the paperwork and all of that fun stuff, we finally got to the point where we got to pick out our embryos. And so they have a small database in-house of the embryos that they have custody over. And any organization that you're going to work with has this kind of database where they have the information from where the children came from. And this is important. We want to have that, particularly for like medical history and things like that. If you have children of your own, you generally know, like, oh, we have heart disease that runs in our family, right? And so you might be more conscious of that. Or you might know of some sort of genetic condition that comes out or skips a generation or things like that. You might be attentive to that so that if your kids or your grandkids end up with something, you know how to take care of them, right? And so this is a good thing that they have some of that information so that we can take care of our kids as they grow up. But fertility organizations will collect a lot of information, particularly if they are embryos that are created not because a husband and wife came and they wanted to have children of their own, but through egg and sperm donation. Some women aren't married and they still want to have children, and so they'll have sperm donors that they will borrow from some man and combine them with their own eggs in order to have children. The embryo that we actually have, that we're going to be inserting, was created both from an egg and sperm donor, from a fertility clinic that was shut down for illegal activity, because of the very nefarious things they were doing, both financially and morally. And so that's how the Rejoice Fertility actually got custody over the embryos that we're adopting, is because the government shut down this organization. They said, well, we don't know what to do with all of these. And because Tennessee is more protective of embryos before they are born, they worked with the Rejoice Fertility to take custody over them. And so a lot of information is gathered on donors so that people can make decisions about, well, honestly, the kind of children that they want. And this is where the eugenics movement of the 19th and 20th centuries overlap over 100 years later with the technology that we have. And I found personally how dangerous this was, because this was, at least my experience, I can't speak for my wife, but this was my experiences. I was reading through the profiles of all of the mothers and fathers of all of these embryos that we could possibly adopt. And do you know what I started doing? I started sorting for genetic traits. I said, all right, are any of these people carriers of any genetic deformities? Are any of these people who have history of alcoholism or heart disease in their family? Are any of these people overweight? Are any of these people who had many, many sexual partners in their past? Because that's actually one of the questions that is asked. And I began essentially doing kind of a Build-A-Bear workshop, but with children. Now, I recognize what I was doing in the moment, but I say this as someone who is probably more pro-life than almost anybody that you'll meet. And my wife is too. In fact, before Holly and I got married, she worked for a pro-life advocacy group out of Wichita, Kansas. She went all over the United States teaching college students arguments to use to convince people that abortion should be unthinkable. And even for me, when I was put into the situation of choosing a child, I was like, oh, yeah, I can see the appeal of the eugenics movement. Because I want the best for my kids, right? Who doesn't? I want my kids to be healthy. I want my kids to be smart. I want my kids to be attractive and athletic and be set up for the most success that they can have in life. I think that's part of being a good parent. But when it overlaps with the ability to choose that, then human sinfulness works its way in. And this is particularly true. Again, we're working with embryos that are already created. It doesn't matter which one we choose. We're giving a chance at life for any of this. But with IVF, you're able to choose and to screen for a number of things, including sex, including deformities, including missing chromosomes, like with Down syndrome. You can screen for all of that. And you can say, I don't want that for my children. And because the fertility industry in general doesn't treat embryos as people, and because that is kind of the cultural milieu that we live in, it's very easy for people to fall into the same boat of Margaret Sanger and saying, you know what, I'm just going to get rid of those unwanted genetic traits. And so I speak as someone who fell into that trap as the person I think, again, maybe I'm tooting my own horn, but I think would be best inoculated against that kind of thinking, and I still fell into it. How much more so for people who are going through this process? And so that's one of the reasons why, at the very least, I will always push for, if we're going to keep IVF around, that states should pass laws that say you can only create as many embryos as you are willing to insert. They say we're not going to not only kill people, but also introduce the idea that we can genetically create our super babies in the image that we want, which is really idolatry, right? That's what Paul talks about, of creating idols in the image of birds and animals and even human beings. I believe that's the height of idolatry, to say we want to take the place of God and create our children in the ways that we want them. And so I will always push for IVF laws that say only insert or only create children that you're willing to insert. And that's actually one of the reasons why we work with Rejoice Fertility, is because they have that same philosophy. They tell you ahead of time, we are inserting all of the embryos that you thaw out. So if you say we're thawing three are going in, and you might have triplets or more, because technically, depending on the stage, any of those can also duplicate and twin in and of themselves. But that's one of the things I push. But I also just think in general, especially because we have millions of children that are waiting in cryostasis, that we should think very seriously about the technologies that we bring into play. That I think we should have real conversations about whether IVF is something that we want to push in our culture, and certainly within the church. Again, I will always push first for people who are struggling with fertility to start with prayer and fasting. I think we neglect the basics of the faith and neglect trust in God to take care of us and to give us the things that we desire and the things that we need, and to fulfill His mandate to be fruitful and multiply. I think we are often too quick to jump to, well, kind of being like Abraham in the story of Genesis, where God promises him a child, but it's not coming, and it's not coming, and him and his wife finally said, we'll take things into our own hands. Here's Hagar, have a child with them. And God says, I'll still bless that child, but he's not the child of promise. I'm going to take care of this. I'm going to be the mover who makes this happen. And so I encourage us all in our culture today, and especially as we see things like President Trump trying to make IVF more accessible, more affordable by subsidizing it in many ways, we should think carefully and critically about the effect that will have, and how that will play out in society, and in particular how it will play out in people's souls when we're put into those kinds of situations. Again, speaking as someone who personally experienced this, I don't think it's good for the human soul to be put in the place where we can play God. Thank you, my son. So that is what we are going to be doing, and a little bit of my thoughts on the matter. But this is a town hall, and so I wanted to open it up for the last 15 minutes that we have for any questions that you have, or if there's anything that you want me to dig deeper on. I was hoping my wife could be here, but of course you hear my son. And so if we need to, we'll pull her back in to answer questions on her behalf, or so she can speak for herself. But are there any questions that you all have that you want to put forward? Or if there's anybody watching online, Seth, I don't know if you can do this, and sorry for just kind of dropping this on you, but if anybody puts into, I don't know if we have a chat or a part of Facebook, if you want to throw out a question from online, I'll tackle those as well. What? Okay, perfect, thank you. So, any questions that you have about the process or really anything that I've talked about tonight?
So if you could go back, now that you found yourself in that trap, would you be willing to say to that organization, don't tell me anything, just pick one?
So the question for those online is, if I could go back, knowing that I've kind of walked through the dangers of this and experienced it, would I just ask the organization to pick one? That would have been, they would not have done that. But Holly and I have talked about the reality of maybe we should have just picked a random number, because of course everything has a listing number, and it might have been more moral and more ethical and maybe better for our souls to just say, we'll pick 3 random numbers and we're going to trust God. Because at the end of the day, we can do all the work that we want with genetics and science, but we can't predict the future, and we have no idea the pros and cons of anything going in. I've talked with people who have had, particularly Down syndrome within my own family, and what a blessing that is, and has proven for those families. Even though, like, I wouldn't wish that on my children, but that's not to say that I know how that would play out. So I think that if I could go back and kind of reset the clock on that, I think that's probably the path that I would have pushed for. Of course, we're a team, so we'd have to figure that out. But yeah, I think that's probably what I would have done. Mm.
We did not want to pick at all anything, but also, like, scientifically, I'm not gonna, you kind of have to pick which ones that are best to hopefully result in live birth. And I think that was complicated too, because especially because it was all our genetic. So
Yep.
that was.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and so again, we would be in different places on that, because they're not our kids. We're getting all the information about parents and things like that. If you're going through IVF, you know, in general, your own self, right?
They break it down very black and white.
Yep, and they'll even do like 1 in 500 chance of this disease, or 1 in 900 chance of this deformity, and things like that, just based on genetic testing. And like, again, it's a very, very slippery, deep slope on those kinds of things. And it can be overwhelming because you're hit with all of it all at once, and you're pressured to make a decision because, again, you're on a timeline, and there's a lot of money on the table too. So yes, so I think that's what I would do if I'd gone again. Other questions?
So you'll be having several implanted?
So you have to create a birth plan, and again, this is, sorry, birth, I keep saying that. Yeah, a transfer plan. So again, not all fertility clinics are the same. Rejoice is a Christian-based organization that says embryos are people and we're going to treat them as people. That is not the case for every organization. But the thing that we are balancing is we would handle twins if we got them. We would not like to have twins. We wouldn't choose that. There's not a whole lot of space for twins to go. Some of you saw Holly when she was pregnant with one baby. I think she might explode. And so we don't really want twins, but we also want to give a kid the best chance, and we also want the best chance of giving a live birth. And so there's this balance of having the best chance of getting a child to full term, and also trying to avoid twins or triplets. And so you have to create a transfer plan. Our transfer plan is they kind of, well, first of all, not every embryo survives the thawing process. Some of them die because of the thawing process. They just don't make it. And so we actually have 3 embryos that we have reserved. And so the plan that we have is to thaw out 1 embryo. If it survives, then they do a grading on the health of that embryo. And that's based on how duplication of cells is going on within the embryo, whether it's breaking out of its casing or not. They have a million different things that I'm sure that goes into that. And so they grade it either excellent, good, fair, and poor. So how healthy does this embryo look after being thawed out? And so we will thaw out 1. If it looks unhealthy, if it's poor, then we will insert that one and then also thaw a second one out. And if that second one survives, then both of them will get inserted and we might have twins. If the second one doesn't survive, then they'll thaw out the third one, insert both, and we might have twins. If 2 of them die, then only 1 will get inserted. If it is fair or good quality, so it looks pretty healthy, then they won't thaw out anymore. Those will go back into the database, and other people will have a chance to adopt them later on. We'll just insert the 1 embryo and pray that they will find a good home there. So that's the transfer plan. And you have to be very, very clear and precise about exactly what you want, because again, that all happens day of. So we will walk in, I think our transfer is at 12, probably at around 11 is when they'll thaw out the embryos and be doing the judging and getting everything set up. And so we had to create that plan ahead of time, and that's true for any organization that you'll work with or embryologist you'll work with, is you have to say, what is your plan ahead of time? And they will not insert more than 3. That's their internal policy. So, but very good question.
That all happens the day that you're there.
Yep.
Do you have to go back? How soon do you have to go back after they say, okay, everything is good? But you go back to this facility, or you don't come here?
We will not go back to this facility. Holly will then begin just blood testing to look at hormone levels to see if if it implants into the uterine wall, kind of nature takes over, and so they'll keep track of that to make sure the numbers essentially are doubling each day. That would be a successful pregnancy, and they'll probably do monitoring for until about 6 weeks. Is that right? Somewhere between 6 and 9. At that point, she would just shift over to normal prenatal care with her OBGYN and things like that. And so again, it will just be the blood monitoring to make sure that everything's progressing the way that it should. That was kind of the stage so Holly and I have actually already gone through this. Right before we came here in January of 2023, we adopted twins. Well, they weren't twins, but they were kind of twins. They were created at the same time from the same parents, and we inserted both of them. Holly got pregnant with at least one of them, but it was called a chemical pregnancy, which essentially means she did get pregnant, it did implant, but there just wasn't enough genetic material to get past a certain stage of development. And so we had a very rocky, about a week and a half of numbers going up, but not going up fast enough, and just wondering where it was. It was not a fun time. I don't wish it on anybody. But again, it was us saying, we have a good home, we have a healthy woman that can get pregnant, and we want to give these kids a shot. And so we'll very much appreciate your prayers starting on Tuesday and, well, really for the next 9 weeks. That's because, again, that's the most volatile and dangerous time for any pregnancy, that everything will go well and that this kid will be able to survive to term. Other questions?
These 3 are not genetically related?
No, none of them. And some of them are. So some will be frozen in batches. So you actually have to implant 2 because if you thaw out one, they're frozen together. So you can't thaw out one without thawing out the other. So some are that. Some are frozen individually, but they're from the same parents. The ones that we happened to have they're single batches. So it's just one embryo from the 2 parents. And so we could run into, again, science fiction kind of humor of having twins that are not identical or fraternal, that they're actually twins that are not related to each other at all biologically, but they will be twins in our family. So that could be fun and interesting. And I know there's a lot of study on the development of twins in utero, and there's plenty of studies of twins after they're born. I will not submit my kids to studies like that, but it would be kind of interesting to see if those same characters or things that they found with fraternal or identical twins would hold up for non-biological twins. But none of these embryos are related to each other.
And did you choose genetically then characteristics or not? You started with pathogen and decided this is not.
Well, we decided not to go too deep. Again, for the profiles, for the women profiles, I think they were 12 pages long with questions and answers and statistics and things like that. And so you could spend a very long time reading through and picking who you want. For all the profiles, there are also pictures associated with the profiles. Usually for the men, they were just baby pictures of the sperm donors from when they were children. I guess there's more anonymity with men than women in that, but there are pictures. We didn't go too much. Like, we didn't have the pictures really as.
Do most people go, is that something that
Oh, absolutely. People will. Well, especially for, and this is another side of the fertility industry, especially for single women, it's particularly dangerous to say, well, what kind of physical attributes do I want? And so they'll choose like men who are blonde or whatever it might be, because I want my son or daughter to have those physical characteristics. Again, I don't think is good for your soul at all. I don't think that, again, personally and as a pastor, I don't think it's good for single women to choose to go through the fertility industry to have children. I think the evidence, every scrap of evidence that we have say that children are worse off if they don't have both a mother and a father. And so I think it's very bad both for the children and incredibly selfish on the side of women who are single, who want to have children through the fertility industry. To basically say, I'm going to sacrifice my child's well-being, because again, every scrap of evidence we have says that children are better off with fathers in the household, because I want to fulfill the desires that I have. I feel very, very strongly about that, and I think it is a travesty for the children, and I don't think it's good for the souls of the mothers either. And that's not even to get into surrogacy, and like that's a whole nother realm of the fertility industry that unfortunately is growing, especially we're in Pride Month, and the growing popularity of gay and lesbian couples going through this process in order to have children. Again, I think there is a lot of very evil things that come out of the fertility industry that we just don't see because we don't think about. And not only it's bad for the soul of the country, right? Especially when I think about gay couples that essentially are renting out the bodies of women so that they can have children. Even if that's consensual, there's no way that is good for the soul of the woman or the men, right? That is, I can think of very few more degrading things to say, we're going to pay you to use your body in this, the most intimate thing. Like we talk about prostitution, right? And now I'm starting to preach, but prostitution and sex as being an incredibly intimate thing, which it is. I would argue that bearing a child is even more intimate, and I think there is something very, very wrong at two men saying, we want to use you just for your body. A lot of people will throw insults about Handmaid's Tale at pro-life people like me or like my wife. It's like, well, you just want to. It's like, no, actually, that's really using women just for their body. So sorry, I'm getting on a little bit of a soapbox here, so I'm going to step down from that. But just to say, there is so much more than even I've talked about here to the fertility industry, and almost none of it, I think, is good for society or good for human beings. So I don't even remember what your question was. I hope I answered it. Yeah, millions of embryos that are frozen in time. And like I said, we're entering in a time where
We haven't found a limit yet to where they can't be frozen to.
right, so for those online, the question was, is there a limit for how long they can be frozen? And the answer is, well, we don't actually know because this is such a new technology. We haven't found the limit yet. Again, 31 years frozen and then thawed and then made it to full term. So not a limit as far as we found yet.
The clinic you're using, they're the guardians of the embryo. So this is a word we're going to use, might not be very nice, but are you or is the clinic paying rent for the embryos? Because I know
Mm-hmm.
we don't have embryos. Ours is just separate material than whatever we need to do.
Right.
But we have to pay a monthly rent on them
Mm-hmm.
to keep them. So is the clinic doing that? Once you agree to adopt them, do you then assume that responsibility?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I'm just going to repeat it for people online. The question is, who's responsible for the embryos when they're frozen? And right now we are. So we've essentially paid a fee to reserve them, and so we're paying the storage fee for these embryos. And just to answer a question that you didn't ask, a lot of it depends on the state as well. So in most states, embryos are considered property. And so if there are a number of different kinds of adoptions you can do with embryos, what we're doing is what's called a closed adoption, which means, well, in our case, the parents donated their sperm and egg and they washed their hands of it. But there are other people that have embryos that are theirs that they'll turn over and say, we don't want to be involved. You take them, you be in charge of them. We're not going to be involved at all. And so that's what we're doing. We don't have to have any connection with the parents or anything like that. There are fully open adoptions, which are people who are putting their embryos up for adoption, but they're paying the storage fee. They retain the rights to that, and they essentially sign it over in a legal contract. And you actually have to work out with a lawyer visitation rights or things like that with the parents of the embryo. And so that's one extreme, and then we're kind of on the other extreme, and there's everything in between, semi-open, things like that. And so you kind of work that out, but as far as storage, the organization has storage, they pay the storage fee, or they maintain it. When we reserve them, we're paying the storage fee, and then any that we don't use, we will then legally turn over with a contract back to the organization to say, they're in your custody now. Now, we could continue to pay a storage fee. So let's say we thawed out one and we got pregnant or didn't, and we wanted to try again in the future. We could continue to keep those other two and pay for the storage fee and then use them later down the road when Holly can do a new cycle. We won't do that, I don't believe. We'll turn them over back to the organization to take care of. But that differs state to state because states have different laws on the books with how to treat embryos. So for example, Alabama, I believe, I don't know if it passed or if it was in the process of getting passed, of treating embryos as human beings, not as property, but as people, and giving them certain rights. And that was a big firestorm in the country because of Alabama doing this and saying, oh, all of the terrible things that will happen. Terrible things aren't happening. In fact, good things are happening because of it. But how you treat the embryos differs state to state. So I would love to see Ohio pass legislation that says, no, we're going to treat embryos as people, and therefore you can't just throw them out, right? That would be a good first step of saying you can't just discard embryos that are created through IVF. But yeah, so I hope that answered the question. Oh, I'm going to go here, and then we'll come back to you, Susan.
So when you were mentioning it a few months ago, Holly, and maybe I misunderstood, but it sounded like when you guys got a call, you had to be ready to go. Did I? Or is it all in prepping Holly when she's ready to receive the embryo?
Well, I'm going to let Holly answer that for herself, but I'm going to repeat your question so that people online can hear. So the question was, we were kind of Minutemen, as it were, rushing off to Akron because we were prepping for this natural cycle that Holly's going through. And that had to do with her hormone levels and keeping track of that, as well as lining up. They do transfers particular weeks in the month. And so you have to line up with that. It's a window that they have that you have to line up with. But I'm going to come over here and let you talk, if you have anything more to say to that.
No, I think you mostly covered it. Perhaps the confusion was in whether the clinic decides when we're ready, as opposed to when we decide we're ready. Yes, well, we have found out now that it is going to be on Tuesday. We just found that out on
2 days ago.
on Monday afternoon, that it was going to be next Tuesday. So we have a few days in which to get ready, but we knew there was a rough window of time when we would be going. We just didn't know the exact date until I finished with some of these preparatory appointments. So that completed on Monday, and now we know when to go.
They were keeping track of her hormones.
To see where in their transfer schedule they could fit me in, where would be perfect for where I am. So now it's all lined up and it's all planned. It's Tuesday.
Thank you. Yeah, Susan.
Now these fertility clinics, so are people donating a sperm and an egg, and just for other people to have adoption? Do they get paid for this? Do these people that decide to do this fertility clinics?
So that's a good question. The question is, are the fertility clinics creating embryos themselves from donations, and then do people get paid to be a part of that? So I want to be clear, the fertility group that we're working with doesn't, unless they're working with a couple, they won't create any embryos through any kind of donations, at least as far as I'm aware. So they have to be working with a couple and harvesting sperm and egg cells from that couple. Then they'll create only the number of embryos they're going to insert and then inserting those. However, there are clinics that will do beyond that. And so, again, the children that we're adopting were created with a clinic that took donated egg cells from women who were donating it, hoping to allow people to get pregnant with their egg cells if a woman's egg cells weren't compatible with life. They could use that and maybe a husband's sperm cells. And from men who were donating their sperm cells so that, say, a man's sperm cells weren't up to snuff, they could use them to create an embryo. They used both donations to create embryos so that people could kind of catalog and pick the embryos that they wanted.
We're not entirely sure about that, actually.
Oh.
We don't know why the clinic that was shut down was creating these. There doesn't seem to have been any parents lined up expecting them. So they may have just, our best guess is that they were just on reserve to essentially be sold to whoever picked them out. But that's not very common, and we don't have all the answers on that.
Right. So thank you for bringing more in line. So we're not exactly sure why these embryos were created, because we just don't have the files from the clinic when it was shut down. But people absolutely get paid for that, particularly sperm donation, because it's way easier. Yeah, men can go into fertility clinics, they can donate their sperm, and they can get paid for that. And it can be actually fairly anonymous too. You can give information, but some clinics don't require you to. So, yeah, it is a fairly unregulated industry. Well, we are at an hour and 15 minutes, so I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I appreciate you coming out and participating. As always, we're not going anywhere, so if you have questions that come up, we'd be happy to tackle them, and if well, yeah, we're going down to Tennessee, but we're planning on being here at the church for a good long while. So if you have questions about the process, feel free to let us know. Also, particularly, this is one of the reasons why we love talking about it, is because it is a wonderful ministry, particularly for women who are struggling to get pregnant. One, I think adoption is a wonderful thing. I think Christians actually should be more adamant in the work that we do in adopting children, because of just how wonderful it is and how good it is to give children good homes. I think Christians should do that. But it's a wonderful intersection of both doing that and also allowing women to be mothers themselves. But it's also not well known. My guess is you're here because you're like, what the heck is all of this, right? And that's generally the response that I get whenever I talk about this with anyone. And so I love talking about it because I think it can be a really wonderful opportunity for women to both minister and to grow their families without engaging in the broader industrial complex that is the fertility industry. And so I hope that you'll be part of my missionary work of proclaiming the goodness of organizations like the NEDC, like Snowflake Babies, like Rejoice Fertility, in allowing women to do this. So please be in prayer for us, be in prayer for these children. Like I said, they've got a gauntlet to make it, not only the thawing process, but also just finding a good home. We've done everything that we can on our end to give them the best chance at life, but it's up to them and to the Lord. And so we pray to the Lord and ask for good things for his children. And if we don't do it, then we've still done our part. We've given them a chance. We've given them a family. We've given them people to mourn them. And we did that with our first two children that didn't make it. We gave them a family, and that's why we do this. It's because we want to give them a family. But of course, like with any parent, we want the best for our kids as well. So please be praying for us and for our kids for safe travels, and we'll appreciate your prayers through the rest of the month. And with all of that said, I guess I will end with a prayer because, we're in church. We should probably do that. So let us pray. Heavenly Father, we live in an amazing time with technology and science that make things that even the eugenics of the early 20th century couldn't possibly have imagined. Lord, I thank you for these children that you have gifted to us. I thank you for Holly and the good health that you've provided her so that she can be a good mother and a good home for these kids. Lord, we ask that you would protect them and keep them, that you would help them to survive the thaw and to make it to a live birth so that we can continue taking care of them. Lord, I also pray for the many men and women, husbands and wives who struggle with infertility, Lord, and the burden that is. Lord, we pray that in your mercy you would hear the prayers of those who want children of their own, that you might bless them, that you might help them to fulfill your mandates to multiply and to spread out all over the earth. Lord, we pray for the millions of children that are in stasis right now. I pray that through the work that we do as a church in the Global Methodist Church, that they might be able to find homes and be able to live good and full lives. Most importantly, that they might know the love of Jesus Christ. And so, Lord, this is all much bigger than we are, but not bigger than you. And so we trust you in your mercy to do good things, even in the midst of the mess that we make. And so, Lord, I pray this all in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Thank you all for coming.